us in, Mark. This is fantastic. Good morning, everyone. Doing things a little bit different this morning on Wednesday.
Yeah, we have video. We have Jaume on video.
This is better. Right. Good.
Good morning, everyone. So good to see everyone joining us today. This feels like a really fancy hotel lobby, you know? And I mean that in the best way.
Good morning, everyone. Lovely to see everyone.
Morning, everybody in Europe. Afternoon in Asia Pac, if we've got any, and a really late night for anyone joining from North America.
Idéer du har i forhold til, hvad er det, vi gør i Danmark, baseret på tidsdata. Nej, det kan jeg simpelthen ikke komme ud. Det er musik, det kan jeg ikke. Jeg har ikke på kamera.
Thank you.
Just going to give a few more minutes to let more people join today. But in the meantime, I can share some exciting news that we just found out this morning. We have over 100 destinations benchmarking for the first time on the GDS-Index. So anybody here who's part of that 100 plus, thank you for joining us. 101 officially, there could be more. But yeah, that's exciting news for us. So this is going to change things significantly, I think, over the following year. But good to see so much commitment from our destinations around the world. Thank you for not only benchmarking, but joining us here for Feeling the Pulse, where we are going to feel the climate. While we're waiting for a few more people to join, why don't we share what our climate is like where we're based? So I invite you to write in the chat to say what it's like where you're based right now. I'll go first. I'm in Barcelona. It's sunny, it's beautiful. It's also in a drought warning, so not so nice, plus and minus. Always in the winter time when it's not that cold, you kind of appreciate it, but then you know what's happening to the planet and then it's a little bit sad. But let me know how it is where you're at. And maybe we can also get to know each other a little bit better. So you can rename yourselves on Zoom. If you go to the 3 buttons at the top right of your profile, you can put your name, organization, and where you're based. So sunny morning in Edinburgh, beautiful. Oh, balmy in Cape Town, South Africa. Oh. I appreciate that people are joining us in between their meetings, but please keep yourself on mute if you're currently speaking in the meeting. Thank you. Okay. No sun, 8 degrees in Hamburg. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, Anya. But Hamburg is quite lovely when I was there this time last year. Let's see. Oh, Horsens, welcome Horsens. You were the 101 destination that we've added to our system. So thank you for tipping us over the 3-digit mark. Hello, welcome June from Copenhagen. Good to see you. How good to see so many destinations making time in between the busy benchmarking season to be with us today. Oh, chilly St. Gallen. All right, well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I think we should probably kick it off. It's 11:05, and we've got a packed agenda for you. So let me see, my screen is shared. All right, just a quick note before we jump in. This session is recorded, so if you have an issue with that, you may keep yourself on mute or hide your camera. Otherwise, we're just letting you know it's being recorded so that we can share this recording after the session. We ask, please stay muted during the session except during the Q&A, but if you have any questions, you may write them in the chat and we will address them later. For your benefit, we ask that you keep it in speaker view in Zoom so that you can see who is presenting at the time. If you have any issues, please raise your hand or signal to the moderator. The moderator is myself or Janie, I'll introduce shortly. You can use the reactions on Zoom to show acknowledgement. So if you appreciate something that's being spoken about, you can put the clap emoji or celebration sign. However it is, we like to keep things engaging. And we will be doing one breakout this session in the middle for 15 minutes. And that will be an opportunity for you to speak with other destinations and participants in this call. So I'm Khalisah Stevens. I'm one of the changemakers at the GDS movement. I manage the GDS-Index, and I'm co-hosting with my colleague, Janie Neumann. She's a senior changemaker, and her expert area is within certifications and climate, as she will also be speaking with us today from the industry perspective. We are super excited and lucky to have our guest speakers today, Jaume Mata, Head of Sustainable Tourism with Visit Valencia. And we've got Mark Stevenson, the co-founder and Chief Impact Officer at CUR8 and the Impact Lead at Climate BC. So both of them will be sharing with us what is happening in the climate field in general and within destinations as well. So here's a quick overview. We're going to start off with where we will be hosting our first GDS-Forum this year, and then we'll kick off with climate updates by Mark, who will tell us where we are now. And Janie will tell us where we are now from the tourism perspective. Then we'll jump into a breakout where we can talk about how are we going to get to where we need to be to solve the climate issues. So this is where you will be discussing with your fellow destinations or fellow participants. And then we'll come back to the main room where we will talk with Jaume about decarbonizing Valencia. And we'll go back to Mark about carbon removals with CUR8, and hopefully have enough time Q&A with our speakers at the end. So super excited, jumping for joy about the GDS-Forum. We've been talking about this for a while, but I think let's have a quick little game on where you guys think we will be hosting our first GDS-Forum. Write down your guesses in the chat. What destination or which destination do you think will be hosting it in? I'm also going to share some quick hints. So I'm not able to read the chat right now, but here's hint number one. This destination is home to a lot of oranges. Interesting hint, interesting guess, Swindon. I can see the first one. This is the second hint. It's the home of this famous dish. Well, not the country. I want specifically a city, if anybody's got one. Oh, interesting. Okay, so not a lot of people know where paella is from. So you're about to learn. Okay, the last one. The last one had guessed it correctly. We are hosting our GDS-Forum in the beautiful sunny city of Valencia. And so it's doubly exciting that we have Jaume here to tell us all about Valencia. And do take a screenshot of this because these are the details. Save the date. We are going to Valencia from the 3rd to the 6th of October this year. And our agenda is that we will be having the GDS-Forum Unconference. So this will be unlocking the potential of destinations and finding the solutions and the beauty that we have together. We will also celebrate the GDS Awards, where we will be celebrating the best performers of the GDS-Index this year. And then we will be hosting this in partnership with City DNA, where they will have their autumn conference from the 4th to the 6th. So very excited to see all of you there and bring everyone you know. It'll be exciting. And now I'm going to hand this over to Mark. Thank you, Mark, for joining us, and we'd love to hear where we are now.
Okay, just let me share my screen. Here we go. Hopefully you can all see a blank white screen. Excellent. Hello, I am Mark, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm basically a consultant slash irritant or insultant, as a lot of people call me, to governments, corporations, NGOs, investors on big systems change stuff. So looking at the interplay of climate change, retreat of democracy, inequality, failures of markets to price risk, et cetera, and basically telling them to stop looking at it from a very narrow point of view and use the tools they have to work in that system so that it doesn't become incredibly fragile and make the future rubbish, which is what's happening at the moment. That's led to me doing quite a few interesting things. I was special advisor to the Ministry of Defence on national security, peace and climate change, where I changed the agenda at COP26 to include climate change as a national security issue. I've ticked off some diplomacy, international diplomacy in that area, which is which is very satisfying. I'm an ambassador for ClientEarth, the environmental law charity, who I'll talk a bit about their work in a minute. I help organizations basically move from extractive thinking to regenerative thinking. But also as a result of that, I've been kind of forced into becoming an entrepreneur, which I don't particularly like, but there you go. And that's part of the reason I'm here, is that I've also set up a carbon removals business. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about why we need carbon removals rather than offsets a little bit later today. So as you may have noticed, the whole world's gone net zero. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's gone net zero. In fact, everybody to a man, woman and dog is setting a net zero target, which is nice. In fact, 92% of the world's GDP is now covered by some kind of net zero target, which is great. The only problem is, how the hell do we get there? So why is everybody setting these net zero targets? Oh, by the way, just a quick, this is very important. I will reiterate this a few times during today, because it's so important to get in your minds that the legal definition of net zero is you have to remove the carbon you cannot eradicate from your operations. You can't offset it. You can't do anything else with it. You literally have to take it back. So everybody's going net zero. Why? Well, I think there are three main reasons. The first is the existential reason, which is essentially if we don't keep warming below 1.5, and we have to do that by 2050, then we are potentially on the brink of environmental collapse and disaster. A couple of examples. So this is where we are at the moment. We're about 1.2 degrees already over pre-industrial levels. And if we carry on at this rate, we will hit 1.5 within the next decade or slightly afterwards. There are all sorts of things that go wrong, but just two I'm going to highlight is the irreversible tipping point that we think is 1.5 degrees, where the Greenland ice sheet and indeed the West Antarctic ice sheet probably start melting irreversibly. And that leads to potentially 10 to 12 meters of sea level rise. We already, by the way, have at least 1 to 2 meters of that already baked into the system. That's just basic thermodynamics. So if you are, for instance, a destination on the coast, this should worry you, and you should be thinking very carefully about it. Also with climate, of course, because of climate change and all the other things we're doing. Thank you for the cough, whoever that was. I hope you're okay. Drink some water. We have unprecedented biodiversity loss, which is incredibly bad for us, and not least because the more you encroach on the natural world, the more you get the zoonotic viruses like COVID crossing over to come after us. And indeed, one is crossing over every 4 months now. Not all of them are as bad as COVID, but these are increasing in severity. We've seen Pakistan underwater. Quite soon, in the next 10 years, we'll have a wet bulb 35 event where it will get so hot somewhere in the world and so humid that healthy people will be dying in 2 hours from organ failure because they can't sweat. And that will probably happen in your career lifetime. So here's a quote from one of my clients at CUR8, the carbon removals business that I run. It says, we're taking net zero seriously because literally this is the only planet we're currently doing business on. It's where all our operations are. There's basically, we have to maintain the operating system that supports all of us, which is the atmosphere. So there is this, of course, massive existential moral reason for us to go to net zero. And as Mark Carney has famously said, you can't self-isolate from climate change. So there's the obvious kind of, bleedingly obvious reason, which is why we have to do it. Then there's actually some other reasons which are legal. So because people are finally waking up to this, you're seeing net zero law being passed all around the world. And the UK was the first to do this, but this is happening in Europe, it's happening other places. So in the UK, we have a legally binding net zero target of 2050. And as with many organizations, the government didn't quite get that right in that they got the target, but they didn't have the plan. And indeed at ClientEarth, we had to take them to court to say your plan doesn't work. That resulted in a new department for energy and security and net zero, which is kind of work on that plan for us to get to net zero. But what that means is that every firm in the UK, and this is going to happen all around the world, is going to have to publish net zero plans. Pretty soon they're going to be audited on those net zero plans. And this is hugely important for every organization, because if they're not performing well against that net zero target, they're going to start losing their ability to do business. Another quote from a client of mine who runs a lot of venues, so they're a big owner of live music venues. They say, we will need to comply or lose our license literally to operate. We want to build compliance into our business model so we can continue to offer our service to our customers. So the very big legal reason, they feel if they're not in line with net zero targets, they're going to soon be penalized by the legislators, which leads to the commercial reason, which is suddenly you're not going to get the work if you can't show a path to net zero. So in the UK, for instance, the government is saying, we will stop buying from you if you can't show net zero commitments. I worked on the net zero plan for the Ministry of Defence. And in that plan, there are certain dates where if you're not providing certain services like building services that are net zero or heading towards net zero, you simply won't get hired. And for instance, in the UK, the Ministry of Defence is the 4th biggest buyer of building services. So that will change the whole building services market in the UK just with that one bit of policy. And there's talk about your performance against net zero as it improves, reducing your corporation taxes is something that we know that the new Labour administration that's going to come in the UK is thinking about. And these sorts of thoughts are happening all around the world because we have to accelerate our speed to get to net zero. So you've now got to think, you know, are you part of your customer's net zero problem? Because a lot of their scope 3 is your scope 1 and 2. Or are you part of their net zero solution? If you're part of their net zero solution, you say, I can turn up and I can give you a net zero offering, then you're much more likely to get the business. Here is another quote from one of my clients, huge billion-dollar business. He says, I do care about the planet, but if I'm going to be hard-nosed about it, the commercial advantage of being the first truly net zero supplier in 5 years' time far outweighs any cost and pain between now and then. So there's huge commercial reason to do it. So you know, from your point of view, what we're looking at is like, here's destination 1, which is kind of doing the greenwashing. Yes, you know, we planted a few trees and we don't use plastic cups. And our logo has got a nice leaf on it for the city. And that's destination 1. And here's destination 2, somewhere like Valencia, that's literally taking this seriously, demonstrating a serious path to net zero. And you know where all the business is going to go. So what I'm basically trying to say is that every organization, every destination, all of us are now kind of a microcosm of the situation that's facing the planet as a whole. The planet has to get to net zero, and therefore so do we. So investing in that journey to net zero, it may cost something now, and it may be difficult. You may have to change the way you think about things, but not investing in it is going to cost you everything later. It's not just the right thing to be climate savvy, it is literally the smart thing to do. Now, we don't have much time, but I often take a lot of joy from this quote from Leonard Bernstein. He said, to achieve great things, 2 other things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time. And that's certainly where we are as a planet. So the plan is net zero, and we certainly don't have enough time to do it. But I think we can probably get there. I'll stop sharing my screen now. And I think that basically sums up roughly where we're at. And I'll now hand back to, I think, the lovely Anne, who is going to take over the hosting. Is that right? Or is it Khalisah? I can't remember.
It's me. Yeah. Thank you, Mark, though. No, but this is, thank you for the summary. Thank you for setting the tone. I'm going to hand this over to Janie now. Janie is going to take us through the tourism perspective of climate action. Over to you, Janie.
Great. Thank you very much, Khalisah. Let's get us started here. And yes, thank you very much, Mark, for setting the scene so aptly, like the urgency of the situation, but also, I guess, the benefits of acting now and acting quickly. So I'm really going to look a bit more at the tourism and events sector. And tourism and travel and events are clear contributors to climate change. So we can't get about that or deny it. It's about estimated that global tourism contributes around 10% of carbon emissions, which is substantial. And as you can see, is a significant part from transport. Not all of that is aviation, of course, but that's clearly part of a major piece of our industry. And recent research has also shown that, you know, the current predictions for business as usual growth in tourism would see a major increase in emissions relating to travel and tourism, which just does not align with the emissions goals of reductions of around 50% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. So there's significant action that needs to be taken to kind of deal with that. Business as usual, I guess, is just not an option, as we all know. So, but tourism also stands to suffer the consequences of climate change. And sometimes I think potentially more than some other sectors, because our destinations, landscapes and coastlines, our historic buildings and our outdoor events and activities will all be impacted and disrupted by climate change. The supplies and services that we rely on as a sector, be that food and drink, transport, will all be disrupted and impacted by climate change, as will be the communities that we live in and that the people we work with live in. So these are just some examples from the past few years of how climate change has already impacted tourism and really made it harder and disrupted the ability to deliver high quality experiences to our visitors. So now really it's more important than ever that tourism and events step up and show how we can be part of the solution, and that we can be a force for good in the fight against climate change as well. And that means that whether it's destinations, tourism events, or events need to really make a clear commitment to net zero, as Mark already said, for lots of good reasons. But we can't just have a commitment and to the targets. We really need to develop that roadmap and show how we can get there. So how we can align our emissions with our targets and goals. So that means that net zero really requires like a science-based reduction targets and a plan. And these targets need to be aligned with keeping warming to around 1.5 degrees to really avoid the worst of climate change. So we really have to have a clear pathway from where we are now, where you're going, what that target is, but also how are we going to get there and how are we going to achieve it? It's a little bit like having a specific kind of training target or regime to say, I really want to kind of get fit and maybe I want to get, more muscle. You can put that target out there, but if you don't do anything about it or have a plan to get there, just wishful thinking won't get you there or us there to net zero. So very similarly, you would have a set plan of what you would eat, what you would reduce, what you would increase. You would weigh yourself and measure regularly to make sure that you're still going in the right direction, maybe set some interim targets, share progress on social media, rope in your friends, collaborate, and find some innovative solutions, which, is very much what we need to do to achieve net zero. So our approach really, and that kind of reflects is like measure your carbon footprint, understand where your carbon emissions come from. Then evaluate the results, have a really good look, like what are the most material impacts, where's the quick wins, what are some of the big issues you can address, and then using that, develop your decarbonization roadmap and plan. So in order to understand your emissions, that means you need to understand your scopes. So there's scope 1, 2, and 3, which many of you will have heard of. And the example on the screen is what it means for a hotel, and which compared to a destination may be quite simple, but can give you quite a good idea. So essentially, it's probably about direct and indirect emissions. So scope 1 is very much for a hotel, like the boiler or how they heat the building, which they have control over within their own building or any vehicles that they own. And then electricity is considered indirect, but still very much within the scope of the hotel. And scope 3 is like the laundry service. So something they outsource, but emissions that are created on their behalf. I also like the example of direct emissions, or like the car you own, because you can choose what car, what fuel, how you drive it, when you drive it. But taking a taxi or indirect emissions cost on your behalf based on your decision, but you don't really have as much control over those aspects. So it's really important to understand kind of where your carbon emissions come from in those scopes. And for a DMO, you should definitely consider your own organization's emissions, obviously in the running of your offices, how colleagues travel, and need to address those to make sure you do your part and lead by example. But it's also important to look at it at the destination level. So at that level, it can obviously be a lot more challenging because there's lots of different inputs, but it's really key to kind of map that journey to net zero. And I'm looking forward to hear from Jaume to share his experience in Valencia, how they did it. When you start, it might seem quite impossible, and it's probably difficult to get exact measures for everything. So it's really important that you can get where you can get measures, but also that you can look and build on that. And there's definitely different emission factors and estimates that you can use. So looking at how people get to your destination, so the various modes of transport, what people do in the destination, where they stay, the attractions they visit, events that happen, and how they get around, as well as obviously other impacts. So just briefly on the measurement, there's different ways you can go about it. So from a destination perspective, there's the destination footprint modeling. So looking at the number of visitors, where they come from, what they spend their money on, and then you can use emission factors to get a pretty good idea. In some areas, it might be an estimate, but it's always a great starting point to really understand better where your destination's at. And it's really useful to kind of work with consultants or universities in this that can have that kind of capability and the knowledge to help you out. Then also you can do pilot projects on your events that you are organizing. So measuring specifically for major events, looking at the venue, at the visitor flow, how are they getting there? And you can use real data. And then you combine that with tools such as Trace, and it can give you a really good idea of that particular event. And if you do that a few times, you can build up a picture of saying an event of this size with this many people in our destination, and that can build your kind of knowledge base to have a destination-wide footprint. So once you have a better understanding of where your carbon emissions come from, and even if you can't exactly measure everything, it's really important to have a close look at those and evaluate the results to help you inform your priorities. So, what sectors are particularly carbon intensive, but also looking at the source visitors by the source market, where they're coming from. Is it mid-haul, short haul, mid-haul, long haul, or by the activities they undertake? Are they tourists, business travelers, cruise visitors, and kind of see how that impacts the carbon footprint. And this can be then really helpful in the decisions to kind of look at what are your climate optimal visitors. So what visitors give you the best positive impact economically and socially for the least carbon footprint. And these are some challenging decisions I think a lot of destinations are making and will need to make in the future. And then really with all that information in hand, you need to develop a decarbonization roadmap and plan. So again, you now have the information of kind of where you are, where you're going. So it's really the how are you going to get there? So again, it's useful to work with consultants or your university to kind of model that a bit more and to see what exactly can we reduce and how can we get there, even if you focus on scope 1 and 2 emissions initially, but also work with your stakeholders in the destination to kind of look at the wider range of emissions and kind of co-create those actions and the steps to achieve net zero. And it's important along the way to kind of share best practice and really raise awareness and educate. So all your stakeholders, how can you support your hotels, your venues, your attractions to develop their own climate action plan and measure their carbon footprint? When you develop a decarbonization strategy, it's really important to keep that carbon management hierarchy in mind. So really the thing to focus on initially is to reduce your emissions overall. So that can be done either through avoiding the activity, so switching things off, reducing it, turning things down, replacing it by using renewable energy. And then those emissions that cannot be reduced, then need to be removed. And Mark can tell you a lot more about the importance of removal versus offset later on. But for most destinations, really to achieve net zero, it will require a reduction of emissions of about 80 to 90%. And many destinations might have an interim reduction target for 2030. So a lot of focus is really on reducing that, because we also don't really have the sufficient carbon removal technology to just remove it all and not worry about reducing it. So that's kind of worth keeping in mind when setting out the strategy. Just to finish off, I just wanted to talk a bit more about the work that I did when I was at Visit Scotland, or that Visit Scotland did collectively to get us on that journey and to destination net zero. So really that journey to net zero for Scottish tourism is one that's kind of started a while back. And it's really useful that the Scottish government has set ambitious targets of achieving net zero by 2045. And that can also be traced through to the Scottish tourism strategy of Outlook 2030, which has a tagline of responsible tourism for a sustainable future. And very much as one of the key components is also to support the 2045 net zero ambition, which is a really important part that tourism throughout its own strategy kind of supports that responsible, sustainable tourism and sees the importance of that. Visit Scotland was also the first national tourism organisation to join Tourism Declares a Climate Emergency, and we were part of the drafting committee for the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action in Tourism. And as I always say, even when I was at Visit Scotland, I just want to reiterate, like, we did not have it figured out, nor does Visit Scotland now. I think it's so important for destinations. This is quite a new thing, an early on thing going on this net zero journey. So a big thing though is we wanted to do those things to show our ambition and our commitment, that we recognize this is fundamental and important to tourism to be part of the solution. And it's really helped actually to have those conversations with our national partners to catalyze international collaboration. So I just assure you, sometimes making the commitment can really help you on that journey, whether that's the Glasgow Declaration or net zero events. And so don't worry about having to have it all in place before you make those commitments. So another thing we did is kind of, we recognize that transition to the net zero economy is a journey, and we need to bring a lot of participants along, whether they're visitors, businesses, other destinations, other stakeholders, and everybody will be at different starting points and have varying resources, be that time, money, or knowledge, which are always very scarce in our sector. So in order to move in the right direction and at the pace required, you kind of want to ensure that everybody's going to the same place. We set out a few questions we could ask ourselves. So the where are we now? That really covers the measuring and monitoring, the establishing a baseline, but also as a DMO to look at what are your areas of influence. So is that predominantly the visitor, some destinations, probably a combination of both, and how can you maximize your influence? And look through the actions you're already doing through a climate lens, like all the activity you're doing, where can you potentially easily add to this climate discussion and also take on climate actions? Where are we going? So obviously those are the net zero targets, which should be net zero by 2050 at the latest. And increasingly, there's very many destinations, especially cities, that do set some more ambitious net zero targets. So if you are a city, definitely check out what net zero target your city has set. So use that as a starting point, and then as you understand your footprint better and what can be done, you can always set more ambitious targets. But it's also about looking at best practice and innovation that's already in place and really visualizing that low carbon future. How are we going to get there? There's like the nitty gritty, the key actions, whether that's behavior change, looking at energy, food waste, and then what's stopping us. I think it's always important to acknowledge the barriers, be that the capacity and the skills that are available, the funding, or obviously kind of, so you can only overcome those once you've acknowledged what it is. But the important thing again is the strategy is great, but we do need to focus on action at pace and scale. So it's really in supporting that industry to put that in place and fostering that engagement and collaboration. And this very much aligns with the 5 pathways of the Glasgow Declaration: the measure, decarbonize, regenerate, collaborate, and finance. So there's some key areas to focus on for tourism and events to kind of decarbonize. And what we did at the time is look at Scotland's climate action plan and then pull out the elements that tourism and events can support. And I know I would recommend that, and I know many cities have done this. Look at your city's climate action plan and then see where you can align with that, which also means often that you can leverage existing advice and support for industry. So this very much covers energy, transport, obviously transitioning to low carbon transport, food and drink, which looks around food waste reduction and shifting to more plant-based options, how the land is used, and often many tourism businesses or destinations are big landowners, but also adapting to unavoidable climate change. As Mark mentioned, some of the climate change is baked in. So how are we going to meet those risks and also potential opportunities? So there's an action plan that was set out, which looks at kind of really focusing on supporting the industry to get their climate action plans in place, working with visitors and influencing their choices, and measuring, as we said before, but also increasing that collaboration, especially with sectors like transport. So I'm conscious of time. So, but what you can do now is start. And many of you will have started already. Clearly, you're here because you're very committed. But if you've gotten stuck because there's always other priorities, then definitely make sure you continue. And because we only have 7 years until 2030, and in this time, really, most of that reduction in decarbonization needs to happen. So try and understand your carbon emissions, identify like top 3 actions that you can take this year and start this year, and then keep going and do not let perfection get in the way of progress. And it's not always easy. You won't always have the right measurements in place or everything be perfect, but do keep going on this journey because it's very important. And the sooner you get going, the sooner you, the destination, your businesses, your event, everybody can benefit. So thanks very much. And I'll hand back to Khalisah.
Thank you so much, Janie. All right, so now we're going to start with the breakout session. So this is the breakout exercise. We'd like everybody here to share current or potential areas of action to move towards net zero in your activity. So we're going to share, yes, the link to the Miro board is already here. So I invite you to click on this link. For the uninitiated, Miro is an online virtual Post-it board. So you're going to take Post-it notes, go to the area on Miro with your group name according to your breakout room. And we will see you guys back in 15 minutes. So Anne, please break us out. Everybody, please click on the link because we've had some people not have the link last time. Everybody, welcome back. Hope you guys had some very good, productive discussions. Okay, well, let's leap into the next presentation. So I'd like to invite Jaume to tell us how he's handling climate action in Valencia. So Jaume, over to you.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Bon dia. Well,
Bon
thanks
dia.
for inviting us to share our experience on this project that we are our short experience, and I'll be short and brief. First, let me share my presentation. We should be there now. Is that right?
It's still loading. Yep, we see it.
Good. Okay. Well, first, a bit of context. Where are we? That's Valencia. Here we are. Okay, Valencia, we are here in this beautiful corner of the planet in the Mediterranean coast of Spain. We are the third city of Spain, or we live here. We are around 1.5 million living here. And talking about tourism, we've been growing and growing and growing. We expect to have around 5 million bed nights for this year. So business is back, and this is good, but you know, this takes some responsibilities. And what's the issue? Valencia, the city, has a new strategy. We were working together with them. If tourism now is a strategy for the city, we must be aligned with them, and we must be endorsed on their strategy. The new strategy is mission-oriented, according to the new European Commission guidelines. And the first mission is to become a climate neutral city. So if the city wants to become climate neutral, tourism has a role to play. That's our responsibility. And how to do it? Well, this is a learning process. We are learning, sharing, learning from the leading examples like Janie explained, like the leading cities of the GDS-Index that are showing the way to follow. And we are taking all these guidelines. First, Glasgow Declaration, sign the Glasgow Declaration and follow the roadmap as Scotland has done and many cities, and declare the climate emergency as we did. Our city, our region, our state has declared the climate emergency here in Spain, and we must be aligned with them. So that's the main topic. There are five pathways to follow. And first, we have to measure, we have to understand, we have to calculate, and then we will understand where, how, who must mitigate. And this is key, credible accounting. No more greenwashing, no more green expressions. What you do, you have to verify, you have to be accountable for third parties, for your customers, for our visitors, for our community. The WTO is giving us many examples, many actions, many examples that you might follow as we are doing. And there's no secret recipe. No, this is just work, innovation, And well, we are applying this public-private partnership with a city, with a company which is partner of the city, has the knowledge to do that, and we are following an international standard, the ISO. So you have the technical reference is the one, so you can compare, and it's comparable to any destination, to any industry. So well, this is our way. This is our case, how we decided to do that. And with that, we get the 3 scopes that it has been explained, 3 scopes, and we split it in 10 chapters to identify who is doing what, where are coming the emissions from. So everyone will know, knows already what's their stake. And we also ran some pilot tests to understand if this destination calculation could be downscaled, and we implemented that for tourist facilities like our conference center, like our big aquarium, which is the 10th most visited tourist attraction in Spain, so it is not small. And also for events, for a tennis championship, for a gala dinner, for the Michelin awards, for instance, for the film awards, national film awards in Valencia. So we have applied that with this company. I mean, we are just the pilot. So this is a merger, you know, this is we are DMOs. We can't manage everything. We have to use the city, we have to motivate them, and we have to motivate the industry. And in addition, we calculated the water footprint, which is quite related to the carbon. Sorry. So the case of the year 19 pre-pandemic, we did this research, we published that, it's on our website, and we verified with a third party that the calculations, the methodology is according to the ISO. So, well, this is a good reference to take. But more or less, we are now with a new version of the ISO, the 2019. We are recalculating the carbon footprint of the same chapters. We have refined a bit the report, and we will publish in a few days, because we are just finishing the auditing, which is quite exhaustive and requires lots of evidences, figures, and you know, this is the task we have to do. And we are understanding where are the main changes, what means we can use to change, to reduce, who is reducing their footprint and who is performing better than others. And that's aligned with the city missions. And again, you will see 80% comes from transport. So there's a little that we can do that, but the 20%, it's the city, I mean, the industry, it's our responsibility. So we have to act on that, mobility, food, sustainable food, or wetlands, etc. And how to mitigate that? Well, the city has already started this project, which is financing for 1,000 companies in tourism companies, right, even restaurants, bars, hotels, etc., to make audits of their energy efficiency and to understand where they could reduce it. So, and help them to do that. So that's the first step to start this way. And not only offsetting. Sorry, I agree absolutely with Mark. Removals. How can we remove this carbon? How can we use our territory, which is our main tourist asset? How can we use our farmlands around the city, which is providing us all this fresh food, which you can get on our markets? How can we use the wetlands, which are very, very intensive carbon sinks? But we have to measure that, and we have to verify that how much can be affordable, and also the coast, the Posidonia, the ocean, our Mediterranean Sea. It's also very helpful. But we are testing that. We're measuring how can we use it. What part of tourism can take profit, and how can we explain to our visitors that this is part of the responsibility. They could even help us to compensate, you know, to deliver a legacy for the city they have visited. They have produced a footprint. They can help us to sustain the city and to make a better future for our. Moreover, well, we are just finishing we will publish this second part. Climate change makes risks and makes changes to the tourism. How will affect that? We have done this research to identify different scenarios that we faced in the city according to different changes that we can have. It's not about industry, it's about biodiversity, it's about drought, it's about the coast, the sea level, etc. How can we affect, how that will we affect to the city? So it means you, the city, you, the industry, you have a role to take, and we have helped you to understand that. And well, all these materials, all these reports are available on our website. It is an ongoing project. We are just trying, we are the chefs of the restaurant, but we need waiters, we need cookers, we need people taking the bookings. It's a team working. And with that, we have shown the city that we are aligned. And we have shown the industry that it's feasible and it's for their profit, as Mark said. There are many financial, many legal consequences of not doing that. So it's not just a volunteer task, it's a must, because it's also profit that we are taking. Why are we here showing our showcase? Because we have demonstrated that it can be taken action. It's a local action for a global challenge, and many visitors and many clients have looked at the city. Well, we have heard about that. And finally, well, we are the next green capital, reinforcing our brand. The city is green, the city is doing things, and we can show to their stakeholders that, okay, your conference will be in a place that's following these guidelines and will verify your footprint, etc. So it's business at the end of the way. So that's how we are trying to translate our motivation, our love for the city, our love for the climate, but we have to talk in the language, which is mainly money. Yesterday we had a question. Main barriers. Well, the priority is that people understand that money, economics is first, and then will come other issues. Now, money and environmental or social sustainability is key. This balance in tourism. So we've got some tools. I mean, you have tools. You have some models to follow. You have the guidelines stated by the Glasgow Declaration, and well, you have colleagues here. We share a network, benchmark. That's the power of this case, of this forum, and we will host here the next forum. We will have the opportunity to share. And finally, please, paella doesn't have peas or sausages. I will teach you. And the recipe is on our website. This is my main message. The right recipe of paella is on our website. Follow that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jaume. So the main takeaway is the paella recipe, authentic paella, can be found on the Valencia tourism website. Thank you so much. I want to invite Mark back to present to us about the good, the bad, and the ugly about carbon. And we'll have a Q&A session after this so that you guys can write all your questions for Jaume and Mark in the chat. Mark, over to you. Thank you.
Hello, welcome back. Or hello again, rather. So I'm going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of offsets and removals, and try to demystify this slightly opaque and often covered in risk area of how to make your destinations actually climate friendly. So, as I said in the first presentation I gave, the whole world's gone net zero, which is great. in the way that they've all set these targets, which we need to do. Then there's a slight problem like, well, how on earth do we get there? And just by example, here's an analysis of the net zero plans of sort of all the biggest companies in the world, and done by the New Climate Foundation. And it came to the conclusion that actually only one of them is only half decent, and the rest of them are opaque. They're not showing they're working. They're using offsets rather than removals, so they can't claim net zero, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is the problem with relying on offsets in your net zero strategy. And again, I just want to reiterate, because it's hugely important, that in many nations and increasingly in more and more, the legal definition of net zero is the amount of carbon that you cannot eradicate from your operations has to be removed, not offset. And that's because the IPCC basically says there's no way we're going to hit 1.5 unless we start removing gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere. In fact, the cumulative figure is about 220 gigatons has to be removed from the atmosphere by 2050 in a way that that's staying down and that's verifiable. So, and you know, there's lots of graphs you can see where they basically say, yes, reductions are good, but we still don't hit net zero without these negative emissions or these removals as well. Now, at the moment, you can go and buy carbon credits or offsets. And the problem is that only 4% of them actually remove carbon from the atmosphere. But they're all being sold as if they're the same thing. And actually they're not. And of those 4%, 96% of those are afforestation and planting trees, which is a good thing to do. But as I will explain, there's absolutely no way we can plant enough trees quick enough for us all to hit our net zero targets and indeed the planet. And this is why you are seeing a lot of legal challenges now from my friends at ClientEarth and others about using offsets. KLM currently in court with ClientEarth, having claimed to be a climate-friendly airline for various reasons, including using offsets, which is clearly, what's the word I'm looking for? Absolute bullshit. So let me explain the difference between these three different types of carbon credit, and hopefully this will clarify why they cost a different amount and what you're getting for your money. So you've emitted, say, 100 tons of carbon. You've done all you can to reduce as much as you can at the moment. You're on a reductions journey. This is all brilliant. This is why you're working with GDS. Then you get to the point, so well, I've got this stuff that I can't avoid. You know, I'm still emitting this carbon, and an offsetting company will come to you and say, well, don't worry, pay me some money, and I will wash away your climate sins, and you can claim you're a climate neutral or a carbon neutral event. And but they're selling you three separate things. So the first is what we call a protection credit. Now, this language I'm using has actually been suggested by the NGO that is the sister organization of CUR8, the carbon removals company. And they're working with all of the legislators and whatever. And the language I'm using now is going to be adopted by the European Union when they're talking about carbon credits. So this is hopefully will be language that will become more and more familiar to you going forward. So the first type of credit is what we call a protection credit. This is where somebody says to you, you've emitted 100 tons of carbon. I tell you what, there's a forest over here or some peatland that has 100 tons of carbon in it. And if that were to be destroyed or deforested, then that 100 tons of carbon would go into the atmosphere. So therefore, what we're going to do is going to protect that forest or that peatland for you. Now, it's important to protect existing carbon sinks, but this doesn't get you to net zero because your ton of carbon has gone up into the atmosphere. And what they're saying is a ton of carbon that might have gone up in the future or is at risk of going in the future is not going out, which is good, but your ton of carbon is still in the atmosphere. So you're not at net zero. And indeed, there's a lot of snake oil being sold around this area where people are charging you to protect forests that, for instance, aren't under threat, or massively overestimating deforestation rates. So selling, like with the recent South Pole scandal, selling you 10 times more of the credits than actually exist. And this affected many large brands who had claimed that they were doing the right thing and then found themselves under scrutiny because they had been told one thing by the offsetting company and it found out that it wasn't true. The problem is that all these things are based on counterfactuals. They're based on what would have happened in the future if you hadn't have done this, which of course nobody can say with any real accuracy. And the second type of credit is the reduction credit. This is where the offsetting company says, well, I will give me your money and I will go and invest that in renewable infrastructure, solar stoves rather than wood-fired stoves, a solar plant or whatever. And what that means is that this 100 tons of carbon that would have gone up in the future from fossil fuels will now not go out because it's been replaced by renewables. again, it's important for us to move to a decarbonized future, but your ton of carbon is still in the atmosphere. You've put a ton up. This will stop some tons going up in the future, but you're still not pulling your ton back. And there are lots of scandals again around some of these credits being missold and how much they're worth and how much, and British Gas is suffering one at the moment. So the only real way to get to net zero is actually to remove the carbon. And so a ton of carbon goes up, you pay somebody to remove that ton of carbon, to literally take it back and store it somewhere safe, and then you're reaching net zero. Now, as I say, at the moment, only 4% of credits do that, and they do that mostly by afforestation. And that's problematic because, for instance, a tree will draw back its carbon towards the end of its life when it gets big. And so this might be 20, 30, 40 years out. So if somebody sells you a removal credit and says, give me that money, you can now claim you've removed your carbon, they're lying. You're going to have to wait 20 or 30 years. If you're, by the way, if they're planting virgin forest, that virgin forest is likely to act as a carbon emitter, a net carbon emitter for the first 10 years of its life. So if your net zero targets in the next 10 years, you're in trouble. So this leads me on to the 4 important questions you need to think about when you're thinking about how to remove carbon. And if the person that's working with you cannot answer these questions well, then I suggest you don't work with them. So the first question is, how fast does the carbon come down? So I made this point about the trees. If you're going to plant trees, nothing wrong with that, but it's going to take a long time. And there simply isn't enough time to plant enough trees, which are also sensitive to the environment, that are not sort of monocultures or whatever, that are resistant to forest fires caused by climate change, that increased biodiversity. There simply isn't enough time to plant those, and indeed isn't enough land. We were asked at the NGO to do an analysis of a software company's net zero plan, and they were very forward thinking. They had understood that they needed to do removals, not offsets. They were on a very good reductions journey to reduce their emissions. And they said, we're going to remove the rest of our emissions using afforestation. And we had to point out to them that that was great, but they had agreed to plant a forest the size of Spain by this time next year. And they said, that is slightly problematic. So how fast does the carbon come down? So as I say, trees, great, wonderful ways of storing carbon if they stay locking the carbon up, but they're slower. At the other end, you've got things like direct air capture. The direct air capture is these massive machines that literally suck carbon out of the air. And one of the providers that we work with is building machines that will take a ton out every minute. And you can phone them up and say, press the button, schedule it for next Wednesday, your carbon can come down really, really quickly. The problem with these machines is they're very, very expensive. And I'll come on to expense versus speed a bit later. So depending on when your net zero target is, this is going to really affect the kind of removals or a mix of removals you might want to buy. The next question is, if it comes down, does it stay down? There's no point in bringing the carbon down and then it disappearing into the atmosphere. If we look at soil, for instance, soil carbon is a wonderful way of bringing carbon down to the atmosphere. Change the way you farm, regenerative farming practices. Soil can quite quickly come back down into the soil. But how can you guarantee that that farm is going to stay farming in that way? What happens if the farm gets sold? What happens if the land is sold for development? And this is why most soil carbon credits only last for 20 years, because it's very hard to lock a farmer or a landowner into a contract for longer than that. And so and also soil is in constant conversation with the air. Most of the carbon that comes into the soil goes into something called the labile layer, which means it's generally sort of only there for 1 to 5 years. And you have to keep it there by, being nice to the land. So again, there's no point in buying something that's only going to be there for 20 years, because you're going to have to buy that carbon credit again and again and again. So even though it might be cheaper now, it's actually expensive in the long term. Another way of storing carbon is storing it in rock. So the direct air capture machines that I just mentioned, they mineralize the carbon, usually in a salt aquifer below the machine. And when it's turned into rock, when it's a carbonate, it's literally gone forever. It's never coming out of the atmosphere, okay? So you have to understand that. So what is the mechanism by which this is being stored, and how robust is that storage? How will it stand up to the future? And then, of course, who monitors that? Who verifies that? Scientifically, is the science robust enough to say this carbon has indeed come down and it's staying down? And also legally, what can I claim if I buy a carbon removal from a supplier? I need to know if I'm turning around to my stakeholders, my government, my legislators, my customers, my supply chain, my partners, my stakeholders, my shareholders. I've got to be really clear that stuff has come down. And of course, the complexity of verifying that legally and scientifically varies. In soil, it's quite hard because soil carbon can change from one field to the next. You have to do an awful lot of soil sampling, and it's inexact because you're dealing with a natural process. So it's quite expensive and difficult to verify soil carbon. Back to the direct air capture again, very easy to verify. You can literally see a tube with liquid CO2 going down it. You can put a meter onto it to say how much carbon is being withdrawn. That's very easy to see, very easy to audit, very easy to verify. And then, of course, when is your net zero target? Because all these things will affect will affect what the mix of removals you buy. If your net zero target is 2030, as some of my clients are, they're going to have to work to think, okay, right, I need to do it on the fast end of that, and that's going to make it more expensive. If your net zero target is a more leisurely 2040, 2045, 2050, then that would also change the mix of removals you might want to buy. You might be able to do it slightly cheaper, but it is going to take you slightly longer. So the way to think about this, or one way to think about this that we think about with our clients is, think about your emissions over time. So this is your net zero target date sometime in the future. And this is the amount of emissions you think that when you've done all you can to reduce, that you're still going to be left with this nub, unfortunately, of carbon emissions you can do nothing about. And that's the bit you're going to have to remove to be net zero. So basically, this is what happens. You're going on your reductions journey, working with brilliant people like GDSM who are helping you think about that, all the brilliant work that Valencia is doing, like how do we reduce? But at the same time, you're going to have to start investing in building up a carbon removals portfolio so that when you get to that date, you can say, I am genuinely net zero. And you can turn around to all those stakeholders and go, I can demonstrate to you an absolute cast iron plan to get to net zero, because by the time I get to that date, I will be removing 100% of what's left. Okay. So what's the advice I would give everybody on this call? And when it comes to removing carbon, the first thing is just to start. Okay, start buying carbon removals, because you're all going to have to do it at some point in the future, and increasingly so. And the best way to do it is to start just by learning. So working with companies like mine, where we can just start to have that conversation. You can ask us all those questions about how it's being removed, and we can take you on field visits to show you where your carbon's being removed and all that kind of stuff. So you just get literate about it. And so a lot of our customers start just by saying, well, we're just going to buy 1,000 tons of removal off you now, and we'll work out where we're going. But that's a great starting point. And the other reason we need to start is because we have to invest in, all of us have to invest in this carbon removals operating system. There isn't enough carbon removals in the world right now to satisfy the world and indeed your own ambitions to become net zero. So we have to invest in that market to build the capacity. So starting is really good. And as one of my clients said, we have to do this anyway. We know we have to do it, so we might as well learn by doing. And basically what you're helping us do there is build this carbon removals operating system for the planet. This is what we're going to need. We need to get that removal system to, this is annoying, you could get a removal system of about 10 billion tons a year by 2050. So we've got to build that, which is why we need people to invest in it now. Use the cost of removing as a further incentive to reduce your emissions. One of the things that I find upsetting about offsets is they're cheap. And if they're cheap, where is the incentive for you to really do the work on reductions? Okay. A carbon removal at the moment is expensive. It's our job to try and get that cheaper as investment goes in, but actually it should be expensive to do because it's hard to do. Okay. It's hard to get it down and get it to stay down and get that verified. But then you can use that to say, well, look, I'm looking at a future bill of my removals going up and up and up. So therefore I'm further incentivized to reduce my emissions. And indeed, we at CUR8 will not work with any organization that's not very serious about removals, about reductions. And in fact, I say to all of my clients, I don't want your business. I wish the carbon wasn't in the atmosphere in the first place because I have 2 children. So like one of our clients said this, is accounting for the cost of removal, it really focused our mind on reduction, but now they reward their employees for finding ways to reduce emissions by giving them half of the saving. So every year they're reducing the bill they pay us, because they're on this reduction journey, but they're rewarding employees by saying, if you can help us reduce our emissions, I'll give you half of the saving with CUR8 as your Christmas bonus. So it's another way to sort of incentivize a culture of reduction, which is what the world needs. As everybody said before, work out whose scope is it anyway, whose scope 1, 2, and 3 is it? Everybody's scope 3 is somebody else's scope 1 and 2. Getting to work with your supply chain and understand that framework is a really good way for you to start to have sensible and informed conversations about who's responsible for which bit. Another quote from one of our clients: building a map of our supply chain emissions enables us to have a sensible conversation with our ecosystem about who's responsible for which emissions rather than sitting in the dark. And again, by starting to talk about buying removals, it really focuses your mind on building that, that map. And over time, what we found with some of our clients is they're starting to fold the cost of removal into their operating costs. So they're starting to say, well, one client we're working with, if you're traveling from further away, we have a dynamic way of pricing that so that the cost of your flight is actually factored into the cost of the ticket of attendance at the event. We're doing the world's first carbon removed concerts at the O2 later this year, where we're using this method. Everybody in the venue is accounting for their carbon removal and putting it into the cost of the burger they sell or the drink they sell or the ticket price. And actually, it turns out that nobody notices, because when you amortize it across all operations, it actually doesn't come out that much for everybody, even though the price per ton is quite expensive. So this is a massive caterer that we're working with. They say, we see the cost of carbon removals as part of our operating costs. It's the same as the ingredients for our meals, the fuel for our kitchens, the insurance for our restaurants. And it turns out we can cover that cost quite easily. And what I loved about this, the CEO said, the good thing about thinking that way, thinking of it as an operating cost rather than a tax I have to pay at the end, is that basically I am now on this journey and I'm going to be net zero before my competitors have even woken up. So that is kind of, I think, a very brief summary of the things you might need to think about. I am for hire, bar mitzvahs, weddings, christenings. If you want to come and talk about carbon removals to you, your organization, do a deep dive, spend hours with you, changing the good, the bad, and the ugly, what works, what doesn't. And by the way, we're not against doing those other kind of offsets if they're done well, because they're important, but you need to know what you're buying. You need to know how it gets you or not to net zero. And I'm very, very happy to be at your disposal should you need me. Thank you very much for having me, GDSM, who are wonderful, wonderful people, and keep working with them because they're great. And also they drink really well. That's me done.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much. All right. So questions. We've got one for you, Mark, from Kirsty. So she wanted to know if you had any information on which countries or places are already working with removal technologies. It's not secret.
Yeah, well, it's worldwide. And in fact, one of the theses behind CUR8, the company, and Rethinking Removals, our NGO, is that we want to put at least 50% of the removals revenue, the people who get paid for removing it, into the Global South. The Global South has done the least to cause climate change. They're going to suffer the most from the climate change if we let it run away with us. So wouldn't it be nice if actually we could reward those people for cleaning up the mess that we largely in the West have caused? But yeah, literally operating everywhere. We have projects everywhere from Australia to Canada to Kenya, whatever. But they have to pass our due diligence. And actually, we're working on a new project called the Great Carbon Valley in Kenya. There is nowhere that isn't doing. The thing is, carbon is a very chemically promiscuous element. Okay, it will bond with anything. So you can take it out in the atmosphere anywhere around the world. It's just where the people who are doing that, who can take it out, keep it out, and verify it. And literally, we have a watching brief at the moment at CUR8 on 175 different organizations that are removing carbon. Only about 7 or 8 of them have made it into our portfolio, the ton of carbon that we sell, but more and more will be coming along as the science gets better, as the investments gets better, as the due diligence gets better. So it is literally worldwide. But as I say, we think it's really important that the majority of that revenue, or at least half of it, is going to the Global South.
Great, thank you. We've got one question from Bart from Ghent for Jaume. He says, I think destinations can work with the 80% of carbon emitted by transport to, in, and for. Is Valencia having strategies to change its marketing policies, or do you feel that one has no effect on this? Okay. Jaume?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you, Bart. Well, that's a tricky question because, well, as I said, we have this consolidated data. We are learning now where are coming the emissions from, so we can identify their nationalities, and most of them comes by plane. So that's my task now, to translate that into the marketing side, to teach them, to say, okay, let's assume that we are part of this complex problem, that if we are targeting at intercontinental markets, we will produce that and we will promote this kind of emissions. If we target more national markets, for instance, will be different with data. Before we didn't have, we have just perceptions. So with data, I can teach and require my rest of organizations to say, okay, bear in mind that if we have to work on this field, we have data and we can understand and we can, the second part was, okay, if we promote these carbon removal projects, we can talk to the airlines and say, okay, I've got credits, I've got projects, you can help us. Are you willing to do that? Yes or not? Well, in the future, we will have to pay for these emissions. So we will introduce in our cost. So that's the learning process that we are doing. But yeah, I mean, first the priority was more. Back to business. Back to business. Don't talk me about no hassles. I want more. So you know, it's the green guy here is trying to say, okay, bear in mind, social and environmental sustainability means that we have to work and we have to act also, right?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a challenge still in our industry to control how people get to our destinations. I think Jess and Janie, well, I'm going to read Janie's question first because it's a bit more about destination. So Janie's asked, for organizations that have a net zero target of 2040 or later, and that has limited funds, what would the benefit be of investing in carbon removals now, or should the available funds and effort go fully into reduction across the scopes, especially over the next few years?
It's a great question. It's one that we get asked a lot. So the big question is, what are we trying to achieve as a planet? And that is to get to net zero. We can't do that without removals. So there is a narrative that says, well, I'm not going to worry about this, and I'm going to wait until 2040, and then I'll miraculously go and buy 10% of removals. The meta problem with that is that if everybody does that, we won't have built a carbon removals business or operating system for you to buy it from, so you won't be able to do it. And also you wouldn't have learned how to do it. So from a global perspective, we need the investment, the millions and billions of dollars to go and build all those ways of removing the carbon. And if everybody waits until 2040 to do it, then I'm sorry, we don't hit 1.5 because we haven't had the investment to build the industry. But also, like, we're working with the NGO, the rule setters, the science-based targets people, and the recommendation is, which we think is sensible, is that what you do is you say, well, like I showed, you've got this target date. As you have interim targets for reducing your emissions, then you should have interim targets for buying removals that get you to that point on the way up there. And then we're all solving the problem together. But importantly, as you're increasingly having to deal with compliance issues where your government is going to turn around to you and say, what is your journey to net zero? If you haven't got a removal strategy in there and are not showing us that you're investing in removals as you go up, you're probably going to start failing against compliance issues as well, because they're saying, well, you can't just wait. You need to be investing in this now. We need to show, we need to know that you understand removals. You need to understand who you're calculating them, who you're working with. So I think there's both a sort of the issues I talked about, the existential reason, well, we need to start investing in it now. Well, there's a compliance reason and a commercial reason. There will, of course, be some organizations that just say, well, I'm going to wait until everybody else has built the industry for me and I'll go and buy it later. If a lot of people do that, then the world is forfeit. We bust past 1.5 and we're all dead and there are no destinations to go to. So you could do it, but you're a bit like the person who turns up late to the party, drinks all the booze, and then is sick on the carpet.
Mark, can I ask you a question about that? So the kind of approach that we've been working on with destinations at the moment is like a portfolio approach. So you're building a portfolio that has some removals, has some protection, etc. So it allows us to kind of scale up bit by bit the removals as the price comes down. But if removals is, I think with you is 200, 150 pound a ton or something like that, and you can get a good offset project for 25 euros a ton, there's a financial implication here. So I guess my question is, what do you think? Is it good to build up like a portfolio approach, or do you think it's better just to draw down and remove 5% of emissions today rather than offset 50 and draw down 10?
I think it's a really good question, guys. So back to the point I made earlier, if you're buying offsets that are at that price point, and actually like some of them at that price point turn out to be quite dodgy, as we've seen from some providers, there is an argument that doesn't actually incentivize you to carry on reducing. So there's that argument. However, I think it all depends on what you're trying to achieve. It depends what your narrative is. Let's say you're an agricultural conference, or you're a forestry conference, or whatever, or something like that. You know, there are lots of reasons. Well, actually, of course, we put some of our money into some of these protection credits, whatever. So I think it's different for each person. What we have found with a lot of our clients is they've gone, I'm so worried about this offsetting stuff. I'm so worried about the scams that are coming. I've actually been burnt by South Pole or a few other people. I would rather take that money and start to remove a smaller proportion now and get me on that journey than use that money and possibly find that actually it's not delivering as much climate benefit as I want. I would not want to dictate to anybody that you should do it one way or the other. What I think is you should probably know exactly what you're buying, and then you can make an informed decision. But I do think that everybody on the call should be going like, okay, we should be putting some removals budget aside. So as I say, quite a lot of our clients have gone like, we did have an offsetting budget. We've literally taken that and we're giving it to removals. And that is one way of doing it. But there's all sorts of nuances. There are some great offsetting companies out there that do these protection and reduction credits really well. And I know that Guy, you work with some of them. So we're not saying don't do that stuff. But if you're going to get to net zero, you're going to have to start thinking about what is my journey to that. And if we don't get the investment into the market, then the price of the removals will never go down. So it's a kind of like we have to blend that approach. And I think that's a conversation that's us at CUR8 and GDS keep on having about how we will work together to take people on that journey. You know, there is no right answer, but the wrong answer is we don't invest in removals at all, and then the planet is forfeit.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I think we spend a lot of time when we work with clients to choose the right offsets, and we haven't been burnt to date. But you know, I think we're doing the right thing, and we've got to carry on doing that. And with you and others, we're looking at opening up and different ways of doing stuff. And so brilliant, exciting. Thanks, Mark.
We've got a question from Helen Peters here for Mark as well. So Helen has asked, is there a risk if carbon removal becomes an expected operating cost that people start taking it for granted, and as such don't work as hard on reductions? A bit like the example you gave on cheaper offsetting versus more expensive removal.
No, I think probably the opposite, because if it's an expected operating cost, you're going to have to start paying it. You're going to start to have to factor it in. And as with all operating costs, as your CFO will tell you, if you can reduce those, you're going to make more profit. So actually, if you're having to pay 100, 150, 200 pounds a ton as an operating cost, and you see that in there, then that's going to further incentivize you constantly to reduce your emissions, because it's going to reduce your operating costs, and that increases your profit and increases your competitiveness as well. So I certainly haven't seen that. What I have seen is with offsets, I have exactly seen that. As I've said, people buying offsets thinking they have reached net zero when they haven't. And then going, well, actually, I mean, I'm on a task force for travel buyers at the moment, and somebody there said, well, I went to my bosses and I said, well, actually, it only costs this much to offset it. And they went, no, that's fine, let's do it then. We can carry on flying as much as we are, and of course that's not what we want. So I think it's removing carbon at the moment is expensive because we're at an early stage of the industry. We've left it too late. I'm reminded of a quote by Winston Churchill, who said of Americans, "There are wonderful people. They will always do the right thing when they've exhausted all of the possibilities." And the human race is at that point at the moment. We've kind of left it too late. So we've now got around to doing the right thing, which is setting net zero targets, defining net zero as removals, but we've left it late, and therefore it's going to be expensive and painful. A bit like if you've drunk all your life and then you have to have a liver transplant. You should have worked earlier. As the Chinese said, best time to plant the tree was 20 years ago. Next best time is now. We are literally having to invest in removals now. I think I may have rambled off the answer to the question, but I hope it was still interesting.
Still interesting. Any more questions from the floor? Anybody, if you're comfortable with opening your mic and your camera, you can ask the speakers directly. No, all good.
I've got one actually, because so Jaume, Valencia, you've been doing this. You've done your measurement now twice. What have you learned from that process that you could recommend to others who haven't started trying to do a measurement focus? And then you're doing more. Now you're doing the decarbonisation work. So what would you recommend to someone who's just starting?
Well, first, from my experiences, you need a partner, as Mark said. We are just DMOs. We are learning. We can connect people and administrations and the industry, but you need someone who's got the knowledge and the technology to do that, and ask them for a clear verification, must be certified. Otherwise, can be individual models or examples. But if we have to show that we are producing these effects, and mainly is that from the measurement, you will be able to register and then to show for the tax regulations that are coming now that you are doing that. But you need to link calculations and verification. Otherwise, it's just it's an exercise of responsibility to learn. Okay, but we have to go a step forward now to demonstrate to the stakeholders, all your stakeholders, that you are credible and you're accountable. Otherwise, we are already in that stage. We can do that. There are many consultants, experts, universities doing that. Okay, but follow standards and get verified.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Well, if there's no more questions, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today in this session. And I especially want to thank our speakers. Thank you so much, Mark. Muchísimas gracias, Jaume, for joining us today and sharing with us all your experience. I think this has been a really productive session, and I'm excited to see where everything goes. If you guys want to see a destination in action, join us for the GDS-Forum in Valencia in October this year, and we'll greet you guys with authentic paella, no peas in them this time. Thank you so much, everyone.